Earlier on in my working life, I spent a season as the business agent for a trade union, and in particular the union that represented stagehands in Vancouver, British Columbia. It was a storied institution, one with a diversity of people, all with a broadly common goal, all sorts of different personalities. And because there were all sorts of different personalities, there were sometimes silly power struggles or fights or conflicts. So it was, in other words, nothing at all like the church. And one of the conflicts that I remember that was sort of in the water, it was one of the family stories of the trade union, took place about 7 years before I got involved. It turned out that throughout the 1980s, there were young people working in the trade union's jurisdiction who were never ever allowed to become members of the union, even though they had worked in some cases thousands of hours in the jurisdiction. And you can see how this might set the stage for unfairness or even abusive conditions. If the union was run by this old boys network, and if you were this young person and you were insufficiently deferential to the wrong person, if you didn't do a favor for a particular person, if you pointed out possibly even the corruption of a certain person, you could suddenly be getting crummy jobs or no jobs at all. And so at the backside of the 80s, a group of young folks who'd been working in the union's jurisdiction got together. They went to the Labor Relations Board and said this isn't fair. And the LRB agreed with them, and it made two significant rulings. It said, first off, all of these people who've worked hundreds or thousands of hours in the union's jurisdiction, they're members of the union. They get all of the privileges and responsibilities of that. And going forward, there must be an orderly and predictable and fair way of becoming a member. And what we're going to say is that everyone who works a certain number of hours is automatically offered membership in the union. So two big rulings. The young people were very pleased to become members, so having shared this with you, having shared this sort of case study, if you like, with you, I'd like to invite you now to develop a hunch. I'd like to venture a hunch. The second part of the LRB's ruling, there's now a predictable and fair way of becoming a member. Who do you think objected most robustly to that? Does anybody have a guess? What do you reckon, Jen? Yes, on the nose. Well done, Jen. Yes, it was the new folks who had just joined the union who thought that there shouldn't be a predictable and fair way of new folks getting integrated into the union. Now, it wasn't all of them. Some of them did think that that was good and fair, but a lot of them did not. They had gone through a hazing ritual. They had been shabbily treated. They had to go through hell in order to become members. So it was fair that other people be treated in the same way. Now, I bring this up not to lampoon or sit in judgment of these young folks. I actually bring it up because I recognize myself in their behavior, and maybe you recognize yourself in their behavior as well. There is some big part of us that says, I've been bopped in the nose, so in a fair world, I get to bop someone else in the nose. Now, my first preference would be to bop the person in the nose who bopped me in the nose, to get them back. Maybe I connect with this story so much because when I was growing up, I knew a lot of bullies. I was pressed up against a lot of brick walls by a lot of bullies, and in many ways, I got through elementary school by fantasizing about turning my violence on them. I wanted to be cruel to them in the way they'd been cruel to me. I wanted to make them feel fear the way they'd made me feel fear. I wanted to humiliate them the way they had humiliated me. So that's our first choice. Our second choice, failing that, is I want my turn being cruel to somebody else. I was bullied. Now I'm a big kid. Now I'm in grade 7. I want to go terrify someone in grade 2 because, that's the great Elton John circle of life, right? And I want to participate in that. This desire to reciprocate or pay forward the violence we've received, the cruelty we've received, the domination we've received, is what scholars call redemptive violence. It is the thesis that something like redemption is going to come if we just get the violence right. And once you start looking for redemptive violence, you realize it's absolutely everywhere in our culture. To look at the news at the moment is to see one example after another of redemptive violence. So we could just start rattling off examples. The cuts to U.S. aid, 1% of our country's gross domestic product. That's too much for us to give to help the poorest people in the world. These cuts are evil, right? But they're framed as redemption. They are framed as the restoration of our country, the scapegoating of GLBTQ folks. I am naive enough to be shocked that even here in Portland, my gay and lesbian friends are reporting that they are, for the first time in a long time, encountering some everyday bigotry that they were not encountering in years. That even here, that I sort of think of as this gay mecca, this kind of safe space, this is a place where casual everyday bigotry is now emboldened or empowered. This is redemptive violence as practiced by bullies, the scapegoating of immigrants. A lot of us in this room are immigrants. Scapegoating of disabled folks. We have a major disabled population that gathers here as part of fame. It is so painful to witness this redemptive violence. I'm naming this stuff because I think it matters to name it out loud. I don't know about you, but I think a lot of us are overwhelmed and maxed out and sad. And in this moment, it's very tempting to, for me, I'll just speak for myself, put my fingers in my ears and like say, la la la, I can't hear you. I just want to focus on donuts and Netflix for the next 4 years. And I think that's not a choice that we can in good conscience make. We need to name that this stuff, that the U.S. aid cuts, that the scapegoating of GLBTQ folks, that the scapegoating of immigrants, of disabled folks, this stuff is evil, this stuff is antichrist. And naming that out loud matters. And I don't want to stop here because I have a hunch that most of the examples that I have given are not ones that this crowd would have a lot of trouble disagreeing with. I suspect I won't get heat in the receiving line today for bringing up these examples. I think most of us are going to say, yes, you are correct. These are deeply troubling things that our country is doing at the moment. Redemptive violence is very easy to see and name as evil when done by other people. So I want to wonder about some ways in which I don't know that I love the word progressive, but as a teacher of mine says, when I speak to you, I have to use words. So we'll just use that word and work with it. I think in progressive communities, one of the we've seen our own examples of redemptive violence. Over the last 10 years, that has shown up in the shunning of folks who express the wrong opinions, folks who are forced out of their jobs. The Atlantic had a great big article about this. They give the example of a guy who worked for a utility company who may or may not have made a white supremacist symbol and was captured on camera. but he might have been cracking his knuckles. Nobody is quite certain about this. He got fired from his job, and there was kind of no opportunity to be restored to his work. There's a lot of examples of that, of folks being shunned from community, all while we insisted that there was no such thing as cancel culture. We see that in our choice to trivialize folks who are feeling economic anxiety. There's a habit I noticed among a lot of progressives of mocking folks who were worried about the cost of groceries. And that should be the last thing that progressives or that a church like this one should be doing. We ought to be the first folks who are concerned when there is economic or concern around the cost of living. Consider the rise of anti-Semitism on the left, on college campuses in particular. How many Jewish students say they are in fear going to classes? This is framed as justice, right? A few weeks ago, I shared via Grace Notes my conviction that it's not okay to mock someone's body, even when that person is Donald Trump. It's not okay to refuse to use the name that someone wants you to call them, even when that person is J.D. Vance. It's not okay to dox a woman, to publish her personal contact information in the hopes that she will be harassed and otherwise humiliated and live in fear, even when that person is J.K. Rowling, right? I shared this on Facebook as well, and perhaps predictably, I got blowback. A friend of mine says it's totally okay. It's totally okay to do those things, because when we make fun of Donald Trump's body, when we refuse to use J.D. Vance's chosen name, when we dox J.K. Rowling, we're punching up, right? This is why redemptive violence is so insidious. It's always justifiable when we do it. It's always necessary when we do it. It's always good when we do it. It always leads to justice when we do it. I think I've shared with you before those amazing words from the theologian David Dark. Dark has speculated that all evil has its beginnings in the desire to root out evil. This is what makes the teachings of Jesus so radical. 2,000 years later, they are so radical. Love your enemies. I'm struck listening to these words that Jesus totally refuses to speak in therapeutic language when it's so succinct and so blunt and so powerful. Often when I get a nasty gram, I get about a dozen accusatory emails a year, some of them filled with profanity, some of them filled with other accusations. And often when I get an email like that, I immediately start thinking, gosh, this person must be carrying a lot of grief, this person must be carrying a lot of hurt, they must be worn down or stressed out. And interestingly, Jesus does none of that. Jesus just says, the person who sent that email to you, that's your enemy. I'm just going to concede that. Now love them. Love that person who sent that. Like, oh my God, that is amazing. And Jesus says, love that person as I loved my enemies throughout my life. Do you not think that it would have been justifiable for me to turn violence on Pilate? It would have been, but I didn't. Do you not think it would have been justifiable for me to turn violence on Judas? It would have been, but I didn't. Do you not think it would have been justifiable for me to turn violence on the crowd that called for my crucifixion? It would have been, but I didn't. I steadfastly refuse to engage in violence of any kind. I will not engage in redemptive violence. This is not where I'm going to look for redemption. I'm remembering listening to Jesus, something that the disciples say in the Gospel of John. he shares a teaching with them, and they say to him, this teaching is hard. Who can accept it? And I feel like saying much the same thing to Jesus when he says, love your enemies. This teaching is hard. Who can accept it? It's not fair. These folks were cruel to me. They started it. I deserve my revenge. It's not fair for you to deny that to me. And I wonder if this is why Jesus tells so many parables in which the kingdom is revealed to be unfair. So consider the parable of the workers in the vineyard. There's some workers who start at 8 a.m. There's some who start at noon. The first two cohorts are working right through the heat of the day. There's some who start at 5 p.m. right before quitting time, and they all get paid the same. And the ones who started at 8 a.m. Come to the boss and say, that's not fair. And the boss said, yes, you're right. It's not fair. Here's your wages. Consider the parable of the what's called the parable of the sower. The guy walking along, throwing seed everywhere, including on the soil that doesn't deserve it, including on the rock that doesn't deserve it. The kingdom is not fair. Consider the parable that we call the parable of the prodigal son, in which the biggest flake in the world is greeted at home with a party. Every time I hear that story, I think about the deeply understandable anger of the brother who stayed at home the entire time. I empathize with him so much. I cannot believe I stayed at home. I cannot believe I stayed loyal to my dad. I can't believe I did all this work. And you're giving my wiener brother a party when he is, it's so unfair. And it seems in all of these parables, it seems like the answer is yes. Yes, you're right. The kingdom is unfair. If you're coming looking for worldly fairness, you are not going to find it within the kingdom. You are going to find something else. If you need redemption through violence, you're not going to find it here. Love your enemies, says Jesus. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who persecute you. If someone smacks you in the face, give them the other side of your face to smack as well. If someone takes your jacket, give them your shirt as well. For the thing that you give, that will be what you receive. In the kingdom, Jesus says, redemption is never, ever going to look like violence. In the kingdom, redemption looks like resurrection.